Well, welcome back to another episode of Broke Up, Not Broken. I'm your host, Jamie Lima, and founder of Allegiant Divorce Solutions, where we help people prepare for, navigate, and recover financially from divorce. This podcast is your one-stop shop for mastering your life and your finances throughout the entire process. In today's episode, I'm honored to host Jonathan Aslay, one of America's leading midlife dating coaches, who has turned profound personal loss into a journey of self-discovery and healing. Following the tragic loss of his son, Jonathan delved deeply into the roots of emotional health issues in dating, uncovering the critical need for self-love. Today, he shares insights from his book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? And his mission to transform dating into a journey of personal growth. So grab a cup of coffee or your beverage of choice, and let's once again get you personally and financially empowered. Jonathan, it's so great to have you here with us today.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. Thanks, Jamie. I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, man, this is going to be a great convo, and a lot of the work that we do on the financial side and is important for sure. But a lot of the work we also do with our clients is helping them understand the emotional feelings and the sense of turmoil and all the stuff that's swirling around them as they're going through a divorce, and how to handle that so they can make good financial decisions through this process. And so I'm interested in talking to you today about the behavioral aspects that people deal with as they're going through a divorce, and how to maintain self-love and self-care and all that stuff through the process, especially as somebody who went through a divorce themselves, both of us having that experience and making, trying to maintain some semblance of sanity through the process. So I think this is going to be a great conversation, man. So, and I'm a big fan of behavioral finance. Yeah. Being a financial planner for almost 20 years. So I'm looking to delve into that with you a little bit here today.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm a tail end baby boomer, Gen Xer. So I was raised with this: go to college, get a job, meet a girl, get married, buy a house, start a family. Like, that was the programming that I had from my parents. I mean, still to this day, it still rings in my head, 40 plus years later. And so when I went through a divorce, I realized that programming, I wasn't even really my script. That was my mom and dad's script that I followed. And so when I was going through a divorce, there's this unraveling of the tapestry of your life with another human being, both on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, and yes, a financial level. Because what's interesting is when you get married, I don't think, and you tell me if you knew this, but I didn't realize that marriage was a relationship with the government. I honestly didn't know that 25 years ago. That's what a marriage is. I mean, I had a different fantasy of what a marriage was. And most importantly, that relationship with the government is centered around money and or children. And that the government has rule over your life. And boy, did I learn that the hard way going through a divorce. And so what's interesting now, and I'm a dating and relationship coach primarily to help women understand what men go through on an emotional level of going through a divorce. If you're dating someone who's even in the midst of a divorce or has a contentious relationship, and usually money plays a factor in that.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to that money scripts concept that you mentioned here. A lot of our listeners may or may not have heard that concept, that theory previously. So can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, and maybe even go a little bit further into like how that shapes who we are as people from a financial perspective as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, or at least this is my perception, so this is my reality, is that we were imprinted with scripts from our parents or the people that raised us. And these scripts are much like code for a program. So you and I are using a program to have this conversation right now. But if you actually went behind the screen, there's all this code, X's and O's and ones and minuses and all. I don't know what code is. I'm just making that up. But there's all this code that creates our capacity to interact with one another. Well, we human beings have the same thing. We have code. We have genetic code. We have, code from our imprinting from our parents. We have it. It's both socio, it's cultural, it's religious, it's socioeconomic, all of this code. And one of those code, particularly for men, is that we are supposed to be the provider protector. That's the code that's been written for us. And today, providing, protecting isn't about muscles and swords and shields and all that battling. It's financial. It's money related, our capacity to generate resources. And what oftentimes happens in divorce for men who are not all men are the breadwinners, but in many cases, they're the primary breadwinner. For a lot of men going through divorce, there's their scriptum, I'm supposed to be the provider protector. And I don't know if I want to do that for someone new coming back to the dating realm. That's one thing that might happen to that script that was written well before they ever got married, as an example.
It's huge. And I also don't want to forget about your comment about the government gaining control over every aspect of your life. We may have to come back to that because that might be a whole podcast in and of itself. I would concur with you and your thoughts on that. I'm a big, not an advocate or proponent, but I say all the time, it's a contractual agreement you're getting into in divorce. Everybody thinks it's like rainbows and butterflies and, $35,000, $50,000 weddings and the cutting the cake type of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really just a legal contract that we're all celebrating. And divorce is just the opposite, right? Like you're separating, you're basically taking that contract and throwing it in the trash can. But so these
touch upon that for a second, James.
Yeah.
This is, and I know I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in what you're about to say next, but, this is the tricky part of human pair bonding. So when I say human pair bonding, two people deciding that they're going to partner up and do life together, because in that, the reality is we need resources, which is money, to survive and not just to survive in our basic needs of what's happening in our life now, but our future needs, because our capacity to generate resources begins to diminish as we age. And yet the cost to survive beyond our capacity to generate resources requires oftentimes this term of nest egg or retirement or, 401k and all these things. And I think there's this fear of once you split up assets, you no longer are taking the advantage of combining two people and making it one, so to speak. And then there's this fear that happens, do I have enough resources? And this is where the contention happens in divorce, because the government is controlling that versus you being able to control that. And by the way, there's to the extent that the government is there is because oftentimes people are adversarial about where they stand on money.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's why, as a mediator myself, I'm a certified mediator. We do a lot of mediation cases, and those conversations, this disbandment of that marriage, that contractual obligation, the dissolution of it goes so much better and is so much more cost effective if both sides are just kind of like, how do we make this the most amicable way possible? And I want to go on with my life. How do we get you to go on with your life? And how do we support one another through that process? Yeah. When the gloves come off and it's just this ongoing fight, you're absolutely right. It's, the government, the courts, whatever you want to call them, are all going to get involved. And in many ways, the only people that make any money or make out in the whole process are the attorneys.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if you know James Sexton, but he's kind of popular in the podcast circuit. He's a high-end divorce attorney out of New York. I'm talking, I think he bills out at $1,500 an hour or something. I don't know what it is, but he's talking about the importance of prenups before you ever get married, which is a whole nother conversation we can have. But at least on some level, before you enter into this contract, that you're actually doing it with a sense of awareness versus what did you say, the $100,000 or the $80,000 wedding and the cakes and the And maybe that's what we should be thinking about before we get married versus the glamour of getting married.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing is, like, a lot of people that are listening now are either going through it or recovering from it, right? And I want you to think, if that's you and you're listening, that it's too late, because there's two things you can think about in relative to the money scripts that we're talking about. Number one is in many ways, it's how it may have, if there were arguments over money all the time and that was a source of contention in the marriage, then in many ways you can look in the rearview mirror and go, okay, like now maybe you can understand it a little bit better. Or you can also look at it forward thinking and think, if I'm going to get into the relationship moving forward and I want to try to have a successful second marriage or second relationship, post divorce, you have to understand your own money script and what your relationship with money is like. Do you stress over it? Do you not think about it? Like, you even go back to your childhood days about how you got to be where you are and your relationship with money and what that's like. Because if you can better understand that, people like Jonathan and financial planners like ourselves can help you make better financial decisions moving forward. And you may not be in that same spot again. Am I right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I want to delve about money scripts because they come in all different forms. Like I'm going to give you an example. My parents are from Istanbul, Turkey. Mm-hmm. And culturally, there's this kind of, and I don't know if this is true for all Turks today, but certainly while I was growing up, there was this script of like keeping score financially. Like when someone does something for you, you are obligated to do something for them. That's a script that I was raised with. So I struggle sometimes when somebody gives me, like there's a generosity from someone, because I have a script that I have to pay them back, and currency isn't always money. There's a different energy, energy is a currency too. So that's one script I have, like, so it rears its ugly head when dating, because when someone is generous to me, I feel an obligation. Or if I'm generous to somebody, I feel that they owe me, and this is where the concept of, we're supposed to be altruistic and give without receiving. But I have a script around that's centered around money, and it plays havoc in my life. I don't do this by choice, but it's there because it's such a strong script. And this is an example of that code that I talked about earlier, or scripts that we all have, and we're all raised with different scripts, and it's going to affect our relationships, and it's certainly going to affect how we navigate a divorce.
Yeah, it's all part of your DNA.
Yeah.
It's, I share the story all the time about my parents were divorced when I was 7 or 8 years old, and my mother worked multiple jobs. My dad worked multiple jobs to try to now support 2 households. Yeah. And there was a time when I had friends bringing us groceries because we didn't have any food in the pantry. Yeah. And if you don't think that's going to make a lasting impact on your life, you're crazy, right? And that's a lot of reasons why I went into the world of financial planning, because I was always so focused around, money and earning money and saving money and investing money. And how do I ensure that my kids never have that same level of stress in their lives that I did at the age of 7 or 8? And that's a perfect example of a money script. And now it's changed my life.
Yeah, certainly people that, for example, that grew up with affluence and had money growing up, they have a different relationship to money than somebody who maybe is grown up with poverty or scarcity. I have friends who grew up with parents who were from the Depression era. And so their parental script around scarcity around money because of the Depression bled over. And by the way, when I say parents, I also mean grandparents that influenced it, is that the grandparents influence the parents influence the child around scarcity around money because of the Depression. Yeah. So, and since my audience is a little bit more about dating, I know yours is in the midst of divorce or considering even some people. By the way, I think anybody who's considering marriage needs to listen to these podcasts and be better prepared. By the way, I think it's better if you're about to get married, I think you should listen to these podcasts. But if you're in the dating realm like I am, we have such this grand expectation that men are supposed to be, they have to pay, they have to be chivalrous, they have to climb to the highest room of the tallest tower to prove their worth, predominantly from a financial perspective. And after a divorce, like I said, there's not only an emotional unraveling, but there's a financial unraveling of your base of security. And a lot of people are just gun shy. They're afraid. They're reluctant because, as we age, our capacity to generate resources begins to diminish for most people. I mean, and I'm talking about once you start getting into the 55, 60-year-old range, certainly if you're in your 30s or 40s, it's a different ballgame. So, and this can have an emotional effect on you. So that's why I talk about the emotional effects of what men particularly go through divorce. And by the way, women have their own fears around this too. So it's the same. It's two sides of a coin, so to speak.
Here, what I'm seeing in our world is about 95% of the people that reach out for help and the clients that we have, and they're women. Right. And if you've listened to any of the previous podcasts where we talked about this, I tell people all the time, like, it's because women are, I don't know if they're smarter. I feel like they're smarter when it comes to stuff like this because they're not afraid to reach out and get the help. And they check their ego at the door, so to speak. And they're like, listen, I know where my falls are. I know where my blind spots are. Can you help? And that we believe that there's some value in making an investment in the services that our company provides. Why do you think, in your opinion, knowing what you know about dudes and behavioral finance and behavior in general and so on, why are these guys not reaching out for the help?
Well, I want to answer that question a slightly different way. I want to address why I think women reach out for help. And I think that will hopefully answer our question. So I think the reason why women reach out is, well, depending on the relationship, the arrangement that was going on during the marriage. So if you had two people both working, they made equal amount of money in the relationship, their capacity to generate resources were relatively equal. They tend to split assets relatively equal. They tend to go their own ways. I mean, that's under those circumstances. Okay. Now, if the man is the predominant breadwinner and the woman was the homemaker, okay, men traditionally have a capacity to generate resources even as they get into their 50s and 60s. But if a woman hasn't been in the workplace for a while, her capacity to generate resources, might not even exist, or maybe, quite a bit different. And then can you even sustain that into your 50s and 60s? So what I think women are doing, and I think for fair reason, is they're trying to prepare life from that premise is I may not be able to generate resource. So is this person is my, husband or ex-husband going to still provide for me? So because you made this agreement, you were holding hands, you gave a ring to each other, sickness and health, death do us part, richer or poor. You're like, this is the promise that was made.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason why women go seek help, because they're really being strategic. How am I going to cover myself for the rest of my life? Now, in some cases, they want to hoard all of the money and say it's all mine because I need it all to survive. Because again, two incomes are better than one. Two people together is better than one. So when you separate it, you're literally disbanding that nest egg, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't men do it? Well, men are clueless. I just want to call men are oftentimes just clueless. We don't think about it. By the way, like, you've been in the business long enough to understand everything I said, right? When I went through a divorce 20 years ago, I wasn't thinking along this way. I wasn't thinking about any of this stuff. All I knew is the government all of a sudden had control over my life, and I was a deer in the headlights. And I was clueless to all this. It would have been nice to know about this well before I ever got married. It would have been nice to have some understanding about this. And thankfully, the younger generation is listening to podcasts like this and thinking about this. Because when I was growing up, not only was I clueless going in, but I was clueless coming out.
Yeah, I would concur with everything you said there. A lot of the guys that are out there that are, if you're one of them and you're listening, you've got to get rid of this John Wayne syndrome and put yourself in a position where you're not clueless going into this. Because even as a financial planner myself, I think I was probably 13 or 14 years into my career at that stage, going into my own divorce. I was like, I've got it all figured out. No problem. Got it handled. And then I realized how clueless I was about halfway through.
Yeah, and men can have a propensity to be irresponsible. I mean, as responsible as men can be, they can also be irresponsible. I think oftentimes what happens in marriage, if the man is the predominant breadwinner and his role is to be the provider in that particular case, sometimes men are radically irresponsible. I'm watching the series White Lotus right now I know this is time sensitive, but there's a scene where the husband is going through a major financial calamity in his life. At least that's the episode I saw last night. And his wife has no clue of what's going on, because in many cases, the man is the 100% responsible for this. And the woman, is no disrespect, is just, she's trusting the man to look out for the best interest. And by the way, it's scary when you put your faith into another human being. I mean, that's one of the benefits of marriage, is the trust. But at the same time, what if the person's acting irresponsibly? That's why women come out and seek help, because they oftentimes weren't even involved in the finances of the relationship.
Absolutely. I'll last comment on that, because what you're saying is so true in so many ways. And then I want to shift into the self-love piece, and then we'll talk about your book and that type of thing. But I found in 20 years of doing this type of work on the financial planning work, there's usually one decision maker in the home. We'll use your example of the White Lotus scenario. He's the decision maker. He's the one that controls all the finances, probably the breadwinner. He pays the bills. He pays the credit card. He does this and that and the others. And then she's clueless in many ways, because she doesn't have to worry about it. And because she's focused on other things, raising the kids and getting them on the school bus and taking them off the school bus and getting them to their doctor appointments and extracurricular activities. I get it. But what I've seen also in this 20 years is that one of these days, that person's not going to be there by death or divorce.
Yeah.
And then you're left to pick up the pieces. And it is incredibly, incredibly difficult to do. Yeah. And so if you're out there listening and that's it's now time to start paying some attention to some of these things, because if that other person is no longer around for whatever reason, it makes it very, very difficult to mourn the loss of their life. We'll use that as an example. When you're sitting in my office trying to figure out, how much money you have in your brokerage account, or what does 401k look like? It's very, very difficult.
I think unlike, hundreds of years ago, when we tended to live in villages and tribes, and you were being supported by other family members and not just emotionally, but physically, these issues weren't as prevalent because you had a gigantic support system. Here in the United States, predominantly, we are very much once you get out of the home, you're on your own kind of thing. I'm not saying that's an absolute, but that oftentimes is the case. And because of that, there's a lot more pressure financially within the relationship. And again, if people aren't having these radically honest conversations or at least couples aren't having this, boy, it can be a scary place to be. And then we got to throw the government, who's going to make the decision for us, and that's a whole nother ball of wax.
Exactly.
You wanted to shift the conversation.
We'll talk about the government and the debacle that they usually create for all of us in part 2 of this conversation. But one of the things, I know you're an expert in this area, and I'm going to ask you some of these questions selfishly, because it's all about me in this conversation. I'm only kidding. But
by the way, we all have to put on the oxygen mask on ourselves first. So
thank you for that analogy. One of the things that I failed to do in my own divorce is focus on self-care and self-love.
Yeah.
So I want you to speak to some of that a little bit here. And obviously, this doesn't have to be, the financial component of our conversation. This is more of the personal empowerment piece of this. But like, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you wrote the book. I'm seeing that it's an amazing cover page too on your book back there. I like that a lot. Yeah,
that
exactly.
That was hand drawn.
Was it really?
Yeah. The person who created my book cover, she hand drew that. So I want to share the difference between self-care and self-love. Self-care is certainly, our physical health, massages, manicures, pedicures, that sort of thing, getting your hair cut, shaving, that's all part of self-care. Self-love, the way I look at self-love is I think of words like self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-reliance, self-discipline. Those are all encompassed in the word love. But more importantly, all of us have a little 6-year-old inside of us, emotionally speaking, that needs nurturing. So there's the adult in us, and then we have an emotional 6-year-old inside of us. When the 6-year-old is scared, nervous, uneasy, anxiety, what's self-love is the adult in you nurturing that little 6-year-old inside of you that's scared. That's the way. And nothing, I'm going to tell you, divorce creates fear, anxiety, money issues, all of that. The little 6-year-old inside of us could be radically scared when, as I said, when you unravel the tapestry of your life with somebody else. And so self-love is that nurturing that little 6-year-old inside of us. Maybe that's coming to someone like you and doing a financial plan. Maybe that's coming to a mediator to navigate the divorce versus, a divorce attorney where it's adversarial. These are all, and self-love is nurturing yourself through these difficult times. Divorce is a very emotionally traumatic experience. And in many cases, Jamie, and I'm sure you would agree, it could even create PTSD. I mean, it can create a real trauma that will have ripple effects for years after the divorce. I know just even the midst of my divorce, which it took 2 years to get finalized, I was in such emotional pain because ours was somewhat contentious. And then there was the whole taking care of children and family court and, visitation rights and, alimony, child support, and all of these things was an emotional, draining vortex for me. And at that time, I didn't know how to nurture myself. This is why I talk about the importance of personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and therapy. And by the way, anyone going through a divorce, I highly recommend investing, coming back to money, investing in therapy to navigate this emotional dismantling of your life, to reintegrate back into your sovereignty and take care of that little 6-year-old inside of you.
You everything you said resonated with me so much, man. I mean, like I went from running 50 to 70 miles a week at one point in my life to basically not even being able to walk to the mailbox because it was in, we live in a more rural area. So it's about a half mile to my mailbox, which would be nothing, when I'm running 50 to 70 miles. And I was like, I just didn't feel right. I was like off. And it's just because you're like, you use the word vortex. That's exactly what you're in. You're in the middle of that and this tornado of stuff just flying around, and we're all just human. So like, how do we handle that?
Can I share something?
Yeah.
When I went through my divorce, the week my then now ex-wife and I decided to split up, I lost my high-end corporate job where I was making over $250,000 a year. My company laid me off, and now I'm in the midst of a divorce. And then the market crash of 2008 was upon us. My identity got wiped out. I financially got wiped out, and emotionally I got wiped out. I was in such a pit of despair that I used to go to bed wishing I didn't wake up. And a lot of that was money related because, a man's worth oftentimes is centered around his capacity to make money. That's, we have this script that a man's worth is tied to his bank account and a woman's worth is tied to her beauty. I'm not saying it's a right script. I'm just saying it is the script. So I think it's important, as I said earlier, particularly, before you ever get married, I think you should do a lot of work understanding what marriage really is all about, particularly from that contractual arrangement. I think it's great to sit with someone like yourself before you ever decide to get married. And certainly if you're going through a divorce, I mean, do your best to put together a team of people around you, because I'm going to tell you something. I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up. That lasted for over 5 years. I was in so much pain. Like you couldn't get to the mailbox kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I used to just close the curtains and have it dark in my room. And I just sit there weeks upon weeks upon weeks.
Oh, that is absolutely terrible to hear. And the scary thing is, though, there's probably 1,000 people out there right now listening to this that are feeling the same exact way.
Yeah.
And we had very similar experiences. I didn't go that far into the level of despair, thankfully, but I went through a career change, started a new company. Because I was basically laid off myself from one of the firms that I was working for. This was during the pandemic. So for early part of the pandemic, my divorce had been finalized at that point, but it was kind of like it had just finished, and now I was so excited about the next phase of my life. Yeah. And then the shit hit the fan effectively, and everything unraveled. So we've since recovered from that, thankfully. But it's like I couldn't catch a break for a few years there. And you're like, what do I do?
Record, my addiction to get through all this was online dating. It eventually became my vocation. So my addiction became my vocation, just like, an interventionist is oftentimes a former alcoholic or drug addict. Yeah, yeah. My addiction to online dating ended up turning into my passion to help people to have these conversations. A big part of what I do is have these conversations so we can at least have compassion for one another. This thing called life is not easy. No. We have this fantasy. It should be, how did you put it? Sunshine, rainbows, and angels singing,
whatever it is.
Yeah. But the reality is, life is an experience, sometimes good, sometimes bad. I would like to finish on this note. Mm-hmm. My book is about personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and therapy. That's the main crux of it. And to anyone listening, I invite you to do the work of self-discovery, and which is really nurturing that little kid inside of us. Because when we do that, whether you're back in the dating marketplace after a divorce or not, you'll be better prepared. And as I said to Jamie, we put the oxygen mask on ourselves first. That's really what self-love is when you can nurture your own soul, you can be a better partner to someone else in the future.
Oh, it's amazing, man. Such powerful stuff today. We didn't even get to the questions I had baked for us. That's how awesome this conversation was. So we'll come back to those another time. But I'm so appreciative of you and your time today, and for joining us today and sharing your transformative insights into self-love. We talked about finances, dating, kind of ran the gamut here. So if for our listeners who wish to delve deeper into Jonathan's teachings, go ahead and check out his YouTube channel and consider reading his book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? You show that picture one more time so they can see the cover? I think it's awesome. What the heck is self-love? I love it. And remember, if you're going through personal challenges or looking to rediscover your sense of self-worth, folks like us here at Allegiant Divorce Solutions are here to support you all along the way. Visit AllegiantDS.com for more resources and guidance. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, Broke Up, Not Broken, for more empowering discussions just like this one. Until next time.